Pedro, a vibrant and attentive young waiter, navigated through the bustling, renowned restaurant Latoil, considered the pinnacle of gastronomy in the city. It was the busiest night of the month, the air saturated with the intoxicating fragrance of truffles and rich sauces. Each table was adorned with meticulous floral arrangements, and the clinking of crystal glasses echoed off walls adorned with modern art. The guests, an eclectic mix of magnates, celebrities, and aristocrats, dressed in their finest attire, enjoyed the culinary experience, oblivious to the world beyond the gates of Latoil. In a discreet corner of the main dining hall, Pedro meticulously adjusted the utensils on a reserved table, his gaze occasionally capturing the scene outside through windows fogged by the interior heat. It was then that he noticed a figure contrasting with the splendor of the environment. A homeless man, with an unshaven face and eyes that told stories of cold nights and days without food, hesitantly approached. Dressed in clothes that had seen better days, he paused with each step as if every movement towards the restaurant required a difficult decision. As the man positioned himself under the weak glow of a nearby street lamp, his shadow blended with the darkness, making him almost part of the urban landscape, ignored by those passing by. Curiosity and empathy led Pedro to observe him more closely. Gradually, the man approached the large garbage bins beside the restaurant, his expression a mixture of hope and despair. Pedro, with a deep sigh that did not go unnoticed by his colleague Marianne, who was setting a nearby table, softly questioned, "Pedro, is something bothering you? You seem distracted today." "It's that man outside, Marianne," Pedro murmured, with a subtle nod towards the window. "No one should have to scavenge for food like a wild animal. And here we are, surrounded by excess." Marianne cast a quick glance outside before turning her attention back to Pedro. "You know what Mr. Gaston would say if he caught us giving food to him. We can't afford to risk our jobs, Pedro." Pedro nodded, aware of the strict rules imposed by his boss, who often stated that the reputation of Latoil is more valuable than gold. But as he returned to adjusting the fine porcelain plates and polished cutlery, the image of the lonely man continued to haunt him. His mind debated between duty and compassion, between following the rules and doing what his heart told him was right. Finally, with the determination of someone who decides to break the chains of conformity, Pedro made a decision that would not only define the rest of his night, but could also change the course of his life. Breathing deeply and adjusting his vest, he headed to the kitchen, his steps echoing his resolve. "I'll prepare something for him. I can't just stand by," he said to himself as he ventured through the busy kitchen, ignoring the clamor of cooks and the clanging of utensils. His action, though small, felt revolutionary in an environment where every gesture was measured and every decision calculated. As Pedro prepared to cross that invisible line between obedience and rebellion, the night continued to unfold, unaware of the small act of defiance forming within its ornate walls. Pedro moved with a firm purpose through the brightly lit corridors of Latoil's kitchen, where the aroma of truffles and exquisite sauces was almost tangible. He skillfully dodged between chefs and assistants, each absorbed in their task, creating culinary masterpieces destined for the tables of the rich and famous. When he reached the area where leftovers were organized for disposal, Pedro paused for a moment, his gaze fixed on the still perfectly good pieces of filet and sautéed vegetables. "Pedro, what are you doing there?" The sharp voice of the sous chef, Henri, cut through the constant hum of pots and stoves. "Just checking something, Henri." "Nothing important," Pedro responded, trying to mask his true intention with forced casualness. Henri, with a suspicious look but too busy to inquire further, turned his attention back to the risotto, which was beginning to emit a deliciously creamy aroma. Seizing the moment of distraction, Pedro quickly selected the most intact pieces from the dishes, carefully placing them on a silver tray hidden under a towel. With his heart pounding at a rate that betrayed his nervousness, he headed towards the restaurant's back exit. The cold night air contrasted sharply with the kitchen's heat, making Pedro shiver for a moment before he advanced towards the man waiting in the shadows. As he approached, the man's eyes lit up with a mixture of surprise and caution. "Here, I brought you something to eat," Pedro said, extending the tray. "It's not much, but I hope it helps." The man looked at the food and then at Pedro, his eyes shining with a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. With trembling hands, he accepted the offer, and his first words were hoarse but deeply sincere. "God bless you, young man. I don't know how to thank you." "No need to thank me," Pedro interrupted, feeling a different kind of warmth fill his chest, the warmth of doing something genuinely good. "Just enjoy the food." As the man ate with a slowness that revealed both his delight and his need to savor each bite, Pedro remained by his side, watching. It was more than just feeding a hungry person. It was an act of humanity in a world that often valued appearances over actions. Pedro knew he could face severe consequences if discovered. Gaston, the owner, did not tolerate deviations from the established rules and would certainly see this gesture as a grave infraction. But as he watched the man regain a bit of his dignity with each bite, Pedro felt strengthened in his decision. He had chosen what was right, not what was easy. Once the man finished his meal, he looked at Pedro with a gratitude that transcended words, his eyes now a bit less tired. Feeling it was time to return before his absence was noticed, Pedro gave a nod and one last encouraging smile before turning to re-enter the restaurant. "God go with you, young man," the man said, his voice a whisper carried by the night wind. With that silent blessing following him back into the bright light and bustle of the kitchen, Pedro knew that despite the risks, his choice reflected the kind of person he aspired to be. As he slipped back to his post, preparing for the repercussions that might follow, the scene he had left behind in the cold night seemed to echo a simple yet powerful truth about the nature of compassion. Pedro had barely resumed his post when Mr. Gaston's quick, determined steps echoed down the kitchen corridor. The atmosphere, previously vibrant with the clamor of culinary execution, suddenly tensed at the presence of the owner, whose demeanor was a harbinger of a storm. "Pedro!" Gaston's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade, drawing everyone's attention. He advanced through the space, his expression increasingly contorted with fury. Pedro, his heart pounding wildly, turned to face the man who, until then, represented the ultimate authority within Latoil. The rest of the team discreetly stepped back, creating a palpable isolation around Pedro, as if proximity to him might be contagious. "Mr. Gaston, I can explain," Pedro began, his trembling voice trying to maintain composure. "Explain? Explain what?" "That you decided to turn my restaurant into a soup kitchen for beggars." Gaston interrupted, his eyes sparking with a mix of disdain and incredulity. The guests, drawn by the commotion, began to gather at the kitchen entrance, their expressions ranging from shock to morbid curiosity. Among them was Chloe Durant, the disguised blogger, watching intently, perceiving the tension unfolding like a scene from a social drama. "I just thought..." Pedro tried again, but the words seemed to fail him in the face of the impending storm. "You're not paid to think, Pedro. You're paid to serve," Gaston bellowed, causing even the furthest guests to jump at the severity of his reprimand. "You not only broke the rules but tarnished the reputation of this establishment with your reckless charity." Pedro felt each word like a blow, his hope for understanding crumbling under the weight of the accusation. "Mr. Gaston, it was an act of humanity," Pedro managed to say, meeting Gaston's gaze with a firmness that surprised even himself. "Humanity? This is a business, not a charity institution." Gaston was nearly foaming with rage. "I consider this a betrayal of my trust and the ethos of this restaurant." "You're fired, Pedro." The ensuing silence was deafening. Pedro stood motionless, processing Gaston's final words, while murmurs and whispers filled the space, spreading among the guests like a wildfire. Chloe, recognizing the gravity of the moment and the potential for a compelling story, discreetly began recording the scene on her phone, her mind already weaving the words that would narrate the event. "Go get your things. And I don't want to see you in my restaurant again," Gaston said, with a venomous calm, before turning and leaving the kitchen, leaving a trail of tension and incredulity. Pedro, somewhat dazed, headed to the locker room to collect his belongings. As he prepared to leave the restaurant that had been his professional home, not only indignation but also a resolution began to form within him. The night still held more twists, and Pedro's story was far from over. As Pedro, with his few belongings in hand, walked out of Latoil, the atmosphere in the restaurant buzzed with the tension of the recent confrontation. In the elegant halls, guests whispered among themselves, their expressions a mix of shock and fascination, while Chloe Durant, the influential blogger and social critic disguised as an ordinary customer, prepared to turn the incident into a revealing story. Back at her table, Chloe quickly opened her laptop, her nimble fingers typing the first lines of an article she knew would be explosive. The hidden camera in her bag had captured everything: Gaston's rage, Pedro's shaken dignity, and the guests' shocked faces. Every detail would be crucial for the narrative she was about to share with the world. On a night that promised to be a celebration of high gastronomy, an act of kindness was met with disdain and ended in dismissal, Chloe murmured to herself as she wrote. Pedro, a young waiter at the renowned Latoil, was fired after choosing compassion over conformity. Does the rigidity of our elite institutions speak louder than our humanity? Finishing the draft, Chloe quickly reviewed it, ensuring that every word conveyed the weight of what she had witnessed. Then, with a determined click, she sent the article to her blog and shared the link on social media. It didn't take long for notifications to start popping up, with comments, shares, and reactions flooding her screen. The reaction was immediate and widespread. People from all corners began reading and responding to Chloe's article. Some expressed outrage at Gaston's attitude, while others praised Pedro's courage. The discussion quickly spread beyond Chloe's pages, taking on a life of its own on social media platforms. Chloe, observing the digital storm she had unleashed, knew she had touched on something fundamental. The messages she received ranged from gratitude for highlighting humanity in an increasingly cold world to fierce critiques of the entrenched elitism in sectors like high gastronomy. As the night wore on and Chloe's article went viral, a chain of events was set in motion, events even Chloe couldn't predict. Pedro's story was becoming a symbol of a larger struggle, one that questioned the values and priorities of our society. With Latoil closing its doors for the night and Pedro disappearing into the darkness of the city, the repercussions of what had happened began to take shape. Chloe, feeling a mix of professional satisfaction and personal concern for the young waiter, prepared to follow up on the consequences of her report. The world was watching, and the next hours promised to be decisive. The hours following the publication of Chloe's article were tumultuous and transformative. As night gave way to dawn, the name of Latoil became synonymous with rigidity and elitism, its online mentions tinged with indignation and criticism. Confronted with the avalanche of negative feedback, Gaston found himself at the epicenter of a scandal threatening to destabilize the carefully built prestige of his establishment. His business partners and sponsors began to question their associations, worried about the rapid deterioration of the restaurant's public image. "This is turning into a disaster, Gaston. We need to control the damage immediately," advised his public relations manager in an emergency meeting, navigating through a sea of emails and notifications. "Prepare an official statement, and make it sound human. We need to turn this around," responded Gaston, his voice a mix of frustration and resignation. Meanwhile, Pedro, now unemployed but not unsupported, saw his inbox and social media flooded with messages of encouragement. People from various parts of the world shared their own stories of challenges and compassion, sympathizing with his choice to prioritize humanity over corporate expectations. Alongside encouraging words, many began to send donations, driven by the desire to support whatever steps Pedro decided to take next. Sitting in his small apartment, Pedro read each message, each gesture of solidarity filling him with a renewed sense of determination. An idea began to form in his mind, inspired by the countless voices calling for a space where values like generosity and community prevailed over profit. "Maybe it's time to start something of my own, something that truly represents what I believe in," Pedro said aloud, as if verbalizing it could solidify his resolve. After several hours of reflection and planning, Pedro decided to use the funds received to launch his own restaurant. The chosen name was Le Cœur, the heart, symbolizing the core of his mission, to nourish both body and soul, regardless of an individual's ability to pay. With the concept of the restaurant solidified in his mind, Pedro began drafting the first version of his business plan. He envisioned a welcoming place where each meal served carried a story of hope and resilience, a place where the community could gather to share more than just food. The grand opening day of Le Cœur was forming on the horizon, with Pedro at the helm of a team that would include not only chefs and waiters but also individuals who, like him, believed in a greater cause. As Pedro outlined the details, a sense of purpose grew within him, preparing him for the challenges ahead, not just as a restaurateur, but as a community leader. As the idea of Le Cœur took shape, Pedro delved into creating a place that would be more than just a restaurant. It would be a haven where dignity and generosity nourished both body and spirit. Armed with his vision and the financial support that continued to flow from benefactors around the world, he began to bring his dream to life. On a sunny afternoon, Pedro visited a potential space for Le Cœur. The location, previously a community cafe that had closed, offered the welcoming atmosphere and space needed for his plans. The large windows allowed natural light to flood the interior, and Pedro could almost hear the laughter and conversations that would fill the air. Just imagine this place full of life, with people from all walks of life sharing a table, Pedro said to the realtor, a middle-aged man with a friendly smile and an encouraging attitude. It's a beautiful vision, Pedro. And with this central location, I'm sure it will attract many customers, the realtor responded, nodding as they walked through the space. Decided, Pedro signed the lease agreement, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Now that the location was secured, it was time to assemble the team that would help transform Le Cœur into a tangible reality. Remembering his colleagues from Latoil, those who had expressed their frustration and dissatisfaction under Gaston's management, Pedro decided to reach out to them. He organized an informal meeting in a nearby park, a neutral and relaxing environment ideal for sincere discussions. I know many of you share the desire to work in an environment where respect and compassion are as important as the food we create, Pedro began, his voice filled with passion as he looked at the familiar and hopeful faces around him. Marianne, his former colleague, was the first to respond, her tone full of enthusiasm. Pedro, we're with you. After everything that happened, it's refreshing to see someone striving to make a difference. Count on me for whatever you need. One by one, other former colleagues expressed their support, excited by the idea of being part of a project that valued humanity as much as profit. They discussed possible roles, shared ideas for the menu, and suggested ways to make Le Cœur a unique experience for everyone involved. With a dedicated team formed, Pedro felt that the dream of Le Cœur was getting closer to becoming a reality. Each member brought a unique skill, a renewed passion for gastronomy, and a shared desire to see the restaurant flourish as a space of inclusion and kindness. Preparations for the opening began at a rapid pace, with everyone involved in bringing the environment to life, from decorating to finalizing the menu, which would be as diverse as the future customers of Le Cœur. Finally, after weeks of intense preparation and growing anticipation, the big day had arrived for Pedro and his team. Le Cœur was ready to open its doors, not just as a restaurant, but as a symbol of community and generosity. The establishment shone under the morning sun, its freshly painted facade and gleaming windows inviting to all who passed by. Inside, the final preparations buzzed with energy. Pedro, wearing a brand new apron embroidered with the Le Cœur logo, supervised every detail. The team, equally polished, shared an excited nervousness, adjusting plates on tables and aligning silverware with meticulous precision. Everything needs to be perfect, friends. Today is not just about food, it's about establishing who we are and what we represent, Pedro instructed, walking through the tables with a keen eye. Marianne, now the floor manager, nodded in agreement, addressing the waitstaff with a blend of authority and warmth. Remember, every person who walks in today is part of our new family. Let's show them the heart of Le Cœur. Outside the restaurant, a small crowd began to gather, drawn by curiosity and the buzz that had spread through the city. Families, students, local workers, and even tourists assembled, all eager to witness the grand opening. As the clock approached the designated opening time, Pedro took his place at the entrance. Taking a deep breath, he prepared to cut the symbolic ribbon. The local press, with cameras and microphones in hand, positioned themselves to capture the moment. "This is a landmark day for all of us," Pedro began, his voice amplified by a small microphone. "Latoil is born from the desire to unite people through food, celebrating our shared humanity. We are here to serve everyone, with love and respect." After a warm round of applause from the crowd, Pedro, with a broad and meaningful gesture, cut the ribbon. The door to Latoil opened, and people began to enter, greeted with smiles and a welcoming atmosphere. Inside the restaurant, the first customers were enveloped by the inviting aroma of dishes being finalized in the open kitchen. The menu, a fusion of comforting classics with innovative twists, promised something for every taste. As the tables filled and orders began to be served, the Latoil team moved with a well-rehearsed choreography, each dish served not just efficiently but with a personal touch that spoke directly to the hearts of the guests. The press coverage captured every smile and every expression of satisfaction from the guests, broadcasting the vibrant and inclusive essence of Latoil Live. It was clear that the restaurant was not just a business for Pedro and his team. It was a mission, a passion, and above all, an open invitation to the community to come together and share more than just a meal, to share their lives. The grand opening of Latoil was in full swing, with the community buzzing inside the warm walls of the restaurant. Laughter and conversation filled the air, creating a tapestry of celebration and unity. The staff, in a constant ballet of attention and care, ensured that every guest felt valued and welcome. It was in this festive setting that a notably distinct figure crossed the threshold of Latoil. Dressed in discreet elegance, a man with an upright posture and intense gaze entered the venue. His face, marked by a resilient serenity, was not unfamiliar to Pedro, who was busy coordinating the kitchen. Marianne, noticing the newcomer, approached Pedro, gently touching his shoulder to get his attention. "Pedro, you need to see who just arrived," she murmured, nodding towards the entrance. Pedro looked in the indicated direction and, for a moment, his heart seemed to stop. The man he had helped, the one to whom he had offered food on a cold night of despair, was there. But the transformation was remarkable. Gone was the lost look and hunched posture. In their place stood a renewed, invigorated man with restored dignity. Jean-Marc, recognizing Pedro, advanced with a smile that lit up his face. The two men met, a firm handshake sealing the reunion. "Pedro, you might not recognize me in these new clothes, but it's me, Jean-Marc. Your kindness that night was the spark I needed to change my life," Jean-Marc began, his voice laden with emotion. "Jean-Marc, of course, I recognize you. I'm so happy to see how well you're doing," Pedro responded, the impact of the moment reflected in his eyes. "How did you do it?" "After that night, I realized I needed help. I sought treatment for my addiction and slowly started rebuilding my life. And now, I'm back in the kitchen, doing what I love," Jean-Marc explained, his gaze revealing a mixture of pride and gratitude. "That's incredible, Jean-Marc. Your story, it just reaffirms why we opened Latoil. To make a difference, even if it's for one person at a time," Pedro said, visibly moved by Jean-Marc's journey. The conversation between Pedro and Jean-Marc quickly drew the attention of the other guests. Jean-Marc's redemption story spread throughout the dining room, inspiring admiration and respect. Moved by the warm reception, Jean-Marc offered to help in the kitchen, wanting to contribute his skills to the success of Latoil. "I would love to be part of this wonderful place, even if it's just for today." "Can I?" Jean-Marc asked, hopeful. "Of course. Our kitchen will be even more special with you in it," Pedro agreed, leading Jean-Marc to join the team. As Jean-Marc donned an apron and began preparing dishes with the Latoil team, the atmosphere in the restaurant gained a new layer of meaning. Jean-Marc's presence, a living symbol of transformation and hope, enriched the celebration, making the inaugural event of Latoil an even more memorable moment in the life of the local community. With Jean-Marc now alongside Pedro, the kitchen at Le Coeur transformed into a vibrant scene of collaboration and creativity. Jean-Marc's skills, honed over years of experience before his fall and now recovered and revitalized, were a perfect complement to Pedro's vision of a restaurant that served more than just food. It served hope and connection. "It's a pleasure to have you with us, Jean-Marc. Your experience and your journey are true inspirations," Pedro expressed as he showed Jean-Marc the various workstations in the kitchen. "I'm grateful for this opportunity, Pedro. Working here, feeling the purpose of this place. It's more than I could have asked for my return," Jean-Marc replied, observing the fresh, local ingredients that would be transformed into delicious dishes. They worked side by side, discussing recipes and techniques, adjusting flavors and seasonings to ensure each dish reflected the restaurant's mission. Jean-Marc introduced ideas for new dishes, each with a story behind it. Stories of redemption and renewal that perfectly aligned with the spirit of Le Coeur. "How about we call this dish Renaissance? It's a tribute to the power of change, a mix of classic flavors with a touch of novelty," Jean-Marc suggested as he finalized one of his culinary creations. "Perfect, Jean-Marc. Every dish here has its story, just like every person who walks through our door," Pedro agreed, tasting a spoonful of the sauce Jean-Marc had just prepared. The news of Jean-Marc joining the Le Coeur team quickly spread through the local community. Customers were curious and excited to try the dishes born from this special collaboration. Reservations began to increase, with many eager to be part of the unique experience Le Coeur offered. As the restaurant thrived with new energy, Pedro and Jean-Marc also planned ways to expand their impact beyond meals. They discussed starting workshops and training sessions for young aspiring chefs, especially those from challenging backgrounds, giving them a chance to transform their lives through culinary arts. "Imagine, Jean-Marc, if we could give others what I was able to offer you that night. Not just food, but a chance for a new beginning," Pedro reflected aloud, the idea shining in his eyes. "It would be incredible, Pedro. Something like cooking to change lives. We could really make a difference," Jean-Marc added, equally enthusiastic about the possibility of giving back to the community. Thus, as Le Coeur continued to serve exceptional meals, it also began planting the seeds of future projects that could extend its influence and values far beyond the restaurant's walls. Each dish, each plan, each promise made between Pedro and Jean-Marc was a testament to the transformative power of love, culinary art, and community. As Le Coeur firmly established itself in the heart of the community, the energy emanating from its daily activities was palpable. The restaurant not only served delicious and innovative meals but also became a meeting place for people from all walks of life, drawn by the welcoming atmosphere and the values Pedro and Jean-Marc nurtured and promoted. On the other hand, Latoil faced a very different reality. After the incident with Pedro and the subsequent media exposure, the high-class restaurant struggled to clean up its tarnished reputation. Gaston, still at the helm, found himself in a continuous battle to win back his previously loyal clientele. The luxurious decor and exclusive menu were no longer enough to guarantee the nearly automatic reservations they once had. "We need to innovate, rethink our approach," Gaston said during a tense meeting with his management team. "Maybe we should consider softening our image, becoming more accessible. But without losing our essence, right? After all, we are a symbol of excellence," responded one of the managers, clearly worried about the possibility of drastic changes. As Gaston pondered these issues, news about the initiatives at Le Coeur reached his ears, increasing his discomfort. The way Pedro had transformed an act of charity into continuous and inclusive prosperity was a painful lesson for him. At Le Coeur, Pedro and Jean-Marc continued to break barriers. They kept the restaurant open to everyone, regardless of their ability to pay, and started programs that involved the community. They offered free cooking classes for at-risk youth and organized events where proceeds supported local causes. "We're doing more than just feeding the body, we're nourishing the soul of this city," Pedro proudly explained to a group of journalists who had visited the restaurant to cover the success story of Le Coeur. "And every dish we prepare carries a story, A message of hope and renewal, Jean-Marc added, while showing the reporters around the vibrant kitchen. The impact of Le Coeur on Latoil and the community at large did not go unnoticed. The contrast between the two restaurants reflected a broader shift in society, where value was beginning to be measured not just in monetary terms but by the positive impact on people's lives. While Latoil still struggled to find its new path, Le Coeur thrived, redefining what it meant to be a successful restaurant in that transformed city. As Le Coeur established itself as a community landmark, recognition soon followed. Regular customers filled the restaurant, and new visitors arrived daily, drawn by the vibrant stories and the food that was as nourishing as it was delicious. Each dish served at Le Coeur carried a story, each meal was an experience, and this deeply resonated with diners. In addition to public adoration, Le Coeur began to attract attention from the most influential food critics. Enthusiastic reviews appeared in food blogs, lifestyle magazines, and even special segments on local television programs. Critics praised not only the quality and innovation of the dishes but also the restaurant's social mission, highlighting how Le Coeur transcended the culinary industry's norms. Chloe Durant, the blogger who had shed light on the initial controversy involving Pedro, had become a constant presence and a supportive voice. On a busy afternoon, as Le Coeur buzzed with lunchtime energy, Chloe was there, preparing a new piece for her blog. "Pedro, your restaurant is more than a success. It's a revolution in both culinary and community," Chloe commented while interviewing Pedro, her digital recorder capturing every word. "How do you feel seeing all this come to fruition?" "It's incredible, Chloe. We feel like we're really making a difference, you know? It's not just about serving food. It's about opening doors, creating opportunities, building bridges," Pedro responded, his wide gestures and smiling face evidencing his enthusiasm. "And about the criticism? Not everyone seems happy with Le Coeur's success. Some still see it as a threat to the status quo," Chloe inquired, always perceptive. "Yes, we've faced some resistance. But I believe that any significant change faces obstacles. Our focus remains on our values and the community we are helping to strengthen," Pedro explained, the determination clear in his voice. Chloe's piece quickly went live, generating even more discussion and support for Le Coeur. While many celebrated the restaurant as an example of how businesses can and should operate with social consciousness, others, particularly those more entrenched in traditional and elitist culinary circles, expressed skepticism and even disdain. These criticisms, however, did not shake the Le Coeur team. If anything, they strengthened their commitment to proving that a business model focused on both culinary excellence and social inclusion could not only survive but thrive. Support and criticism shaped Le Coeur's path, as Pedro and his team continued to navigate the complex waters of hospitality, committed to maintaining their ethos of openness and care, regardless of the challenges they faced. The success of Le Coeur was not confined to the walls of its first establishment. With each meal served and each story shared, Pedro and Jean-Marc's vision grew larger and more encompassing. The idea that a restaurant could be a vehicle for social change proved not only viable but vibrant and necessary. With this in mind, they both decided to take their mission further. On a bright morning, Pedro and Jean-Marc gathered in the small office at the back of the restaurant, maps and plans spread out on the table. They discussed potential cities for new Le Coeur branches, each location chosen not just for its culinary market but also for the community impact they could have. "What do you think about starting with the city of Springfield? They have a vibrant and diverse community, and I believe our approach would be well received there," Jean-Marc suggested, pointing to the map with a marker. "I agree. And there's also the city of Riverside. I read about the economic challenges they are facing. Our presence there could make a significant difference," Pedro added, his gaze scanning demographic and economic reports. With the target cities defined, the duo began planning the openings. Each new Le Coeur branch would be created with the same spirit as the original but with unique touches that reflected the local communities. They planned not only to serve meals but also to create culinary training programs for local youth, collaborate with regional farmers and artisans, and organize events that brought people together around food and conversation. Each new liqueur will be a beacon of hope and generosity, just as you said, Jean-Marc. But each one will have its own identity, something that resonates with the local community, Pedro explained, enthusiastic about the expansion and the possibilities for innovation. That's essential. We want each restaurant to be a reflection of its neighborhood, its city. Not just a copy of the original, Jean-Marc agreed, always attentive to the details that made liqueur special. As the plans took shape, Pedro and Jean-Marc also invested in technology and sustainable practices to ensure that liqueur's growth was responsible and respectful of the environment. Advanced recycling systems, the use of renewable energy, and menus adapted to minimize waste were just some of the aspects they considered. The excitement about the expansion was palpable, and the communities in the chosen cities began to anticipate liqueur's arrival. News of the expansion spread, and expectations were high. Pedro and Jean-Marc knew that each new branch would bring its own challenges, but they were ready to face them, armed with their mission to nourish bodies, minds, and souls. As liqueur established itself in new cities, its influence spread even more widely, transcending not just geographical borders but also cultural ones. Pedro and Jean-Marc's model, centered on community and sustainability, began to resonate globally, capturing the attention of restaurateurs and entrepreneurs around the world. What had started as a simple expression of humanity in a single restaurant transformed into an icon of change in the hospitality industry. At an international seminar on innovation in hospitality, held in a major metropolis, Pedro was invited to speak about the success and philosophy of liqueur. In the audience, hundreds of participants, from small business owners to major hotel chain executives, listened attentively. Ladies and gentlemen, liqueur is not just a restaurant. It is proof that it is possible to do business ethically and still prosper, Pedro began, his voice firm and full of passion. We chose to put people before profit, and this brought us more than just financial success. It brought us a global community. A restaurateur from Canada, inspired by Pedro's talk, shared his experience during the Q&A session. Pedro, your story inspired our cafe chain to adopt similar practices. We started with a small, suspended coffee program, where customers can pay in advance for a coffee for someone who cannot afford it. Now, it has grown and become a central part of our business. That's wonderful to hear, Pedro responded, a smile of satisfaction lighting up his face. Every small step like this contributes to a greater change. The stories of liqueur and its global counterparts generated a wave of articles in sustainability blogs, news reports, and documentaries on the growing trend of social responsibility in business. This global movement not only changed the way restaurants operated, but also how people perceived the relationship between consumption and community. In European, Asian, and American cities, new establishments emerged, each adopting and adapting the philosophy of liqueur in its unique way. Some focused on eliminating food waste, others on providing training and employment to marginalized communities. Each new restaurant, inspired by the success of liqueur, served as a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of generosity and innovation. Pedro and Jean-Marc, seeing the impact of their ideas, felt a mixture of humility and pride. They had started something greater than themselves, a movement that challenged established norms and redefined the meaning of success in the business world. And as liqueur continued to grow and inspire, they knew that each new initiative was a step toward a more just and connected world. As liqueur expanded its global influence, the complexity of managing a network of restaurants operating under ethical and sustainable principles became increasingly evident. For Pedro and Jean-Marc, each new branch brought not only opportunities but also significant challenges that tested their ability to maintain the core ideals of their vision without compromising the daily operations of the establishments. On a typical afternoon, Pedro and Jean-Marc met in the conference room of liqueur's main headquarters, surrounded by performance charts, sustainability reports, and future expansion plans. The air was filled with a mix of strong coffee and anticipation. We are facing a significant dilemma with our ingredient suppliers, Jean-Marc began, running a tired hand through his hair. How do we ensure that every ingredient we use meets our quality standards as well as our ethical and sustainable principles? Pedro, looking at a map dotted with the locations of all Le Coeur restaurants, responded thoughtfully. Maybe we need to consider developing deeper local partnerships. We could work directly with small farmers and producers, ensuring not only quality but also the ethical sourcing of products. That also presents the logistical challenge of maintaining consistency across all restaurants. Each location has its own set of resources and limitations, Jean-Marc added, leafing through a report on recent quality inspections. The discussion deepened, with Pedro and Jean-Marc evaluating different business models that could be adapted to align the operations with Le Coeur's ideals. They considered everything from investing in renewable energy technologies to reduce the restaurant's carbon footprint to implementing more efficient water recycling systems. And what about our team? As we grow, we need to ensure that every new member aligns with Le Coeur's mission. Training and integration are crucial, Pedro emphasized, aware that the company's culture was as vital as its operations. I agree. Let's develop a robust training program focused not only on culinary skills but also on the core values of Le Coeur, Jean-Marc suggested, already sketching out a preliminary plan on his laptop. As the day progressed, the list of challenges grew, but so did Pedro and Jean-Marc's commitment to overcoming them. Every decision made reflected their dedication not just to a restaurant but to a movement they believed could transform the hospitality industry. As they prepared to close the meeting, a new challenge emerged: the need to expand their influence not only physically with new restaurants but also culturally, through education and community involvement. They knew that every step forward would require innovation, patience, and unwavering dedication to their ideals. As Le Coeur continued to expand, Pedro and Jean-Marc recognized the importance of giving back to the community in increasingly meaningful ways. Solidarity, one of the restaurant's founding pillars, now manifested through an ambitious initiative, a training program for homeless individuals designed to offer more than just meals, a true path to social reintegration. On a crisp and clear morning, preparations for the program's launch were in full swing. Pedro, Jean-Marc, and their team gathered in the main kitchen of Le Coeur, discussing the final details of the program. It's essential that this program be more than just culinary training. We want to offer life skills, emotional support, and above all, a welcoming community, Pedro explained as he reviewed the curriculum, which included everything from basic kitchen techniques to classes on financial management and mental health. I completely agree, Jean-Marc responded, looking at the hopeful faces of some of the future participants who had already begun to gather. Each person entering our program is looking for a second chance, not just to survive, but to thrive. With the program's launch, the first group of participants was carefully selected, with Le Coeur's team working closely with local shelters and community organizations. Each participant was chosen not only based on need, but also on their desire to learn and grow. Welcome to our training program. Here, you are more than students. You are part of the heart of Le Coeur, Pedro announced, addressing the group gathered in the kitchen adapted for the classes. We are here to support you every step of the way. The participants, men and women of different ages and backgrounds, listened attentively, many with expressions of cautious optimism. For many, this was the first significant opportunity in a long time to change their circumstances. The program combined practical kitchen sessions with life skills workshops. Experienced chefs from Le Coeur and volunteers specialized in social assistance led the classes, each designed to build the participants' confidence and equip them with practical and transferable skills. Today, we'll start with the basics of food preparation and then discuss how these skills can be a bridge to new opportunities, Jean-Marc explained, while demonstrating safe cutting techniques. The program's impact began to be felt almost immediately. Stories of participants, like Maria, a single mother who found a new vocation and hope for the future through the program, started to circulate, further inspiring the community to support the project. As the training program gained recognition both locally and nationally, Pedro and Jean-Marc planned to expand it, not only to serve more people but also to include other areas of training and personal development. They were committed to maintaining continuous solidarity, turning every meal into an act of love and every training opportunity into a step towards a better life. With the growing success of Latoil and the visibility of its social impact programs, Pedro's story spread even further, reaching the ears of old acquaintances and new admirers. One day, while Pedro was reviewing some sustainability reports in Latoil's meeting room, he received an unexpected call. "Pedro, there's a call for you." "It's from Latoil," announced Marianne, with an intrigued expression. Pedro looked up from the paper, surprised, but accepted the call. On the other end of the line, a formal and polite voice introduced himself as Jacques, the new director of Latoil. "Mr. Pedro, my name is Jacques Moreau, and I am the new director of Latoil. I would like to schedule a meeting with you to discuss an interesting proposal." "I believe it would be of your interest," Jacques said, his voice smooth but firm. "Jacques, it's a pleasure to speak with you. I'm curious about what could be so interesting," Pedro replied, with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. The next day, Pedro met with Jacques at a quiet cafe downtown. Jacques, an elegant and clearly competent man, seemed genuinely interested in hearing Pedro's story. "Pedro, I'll get straight to the point. Latoil has gone through a tough phase since you left. We are trying to redefine our image and practices. We would like to invite you to return, but this time in a leadership position, helping us implement some of the innovative approaches you've developed at Latoil," Jacques proposed, with a hopeful smile. Pedro, surprised by the offer, pondered for a moment before responding. "I appreciate the proposal, Jacques. It is indeed an ironic twist to be invited back to the place where my journey took such an unexpected turn. However, my mission with Latoil is more than a job, it's a lifelong commitment," Pedro said, his tone reflecting his conviction. "Here, we are doing something that goes beyond just serving food. We are changing lives." Jacques listened attentively, realizing the depth of Pedro's commitment. "I understand, Pedro, and I deeply respect your decision. Perhaps we can collaborate in other ways, exchanging ideas and practices that could benefit both restaurants," Jacques suggested, seeking a way to keep the door open for future collaborations. "I would love that, Jacques. There's always room to learn and grow, and perhaps we can create an even greater impact together," Pedro responded, extending his hand for a firm handshake. This conversation marked a new chapter, not only for Pedro but also for Latoil, which began to rebuild under new leadership and with a fresh perspective. Pedro returned to Latoil with a sense of fulfillment, knowing that his choices and convictions were paving the way for a more inclusive and compassionate future. As he walked through the vibrant streets of his city, Pedro reflected on how far he had come since that fateful day when he was fired from Latoil. Now, he not only led a successful restaurant but also inspired positive change throughout the culinary industry. And, with new challenges and opportunities ahead, Pedro was more determined than ever to continue making a difference. As the years passed, Latoil continued to grow and thrive, establishing itself as a shining example of how a business can be both profitable and socially responsible. Pedro's name became synonymous with innovation and compassion in the culinary world. Each Latoil restaurant, with its regional particularities and unique stories, contributed to a global movement that challenged the traditional conventions of the industry. On a sunny morning, Pedro found himself at a conference on sustainable business, surrounded by leaders from various industries, all eager to hear his ideas and experiences. Stepping onto the stage, he adjusted the microphone and looked at the audience with a confident smile. "Good morning, everyone. Today, I want to share with you not just the journey of Latoil, but the lessons we've learned along the way," Pedro began, his voice resonating through the auditorium. "When we started Latoil, our vision was simple: to create a space where everyone could enjoy a dignified meal, regardless of their financial situation." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "We quickly realized that our true impact went beyond the food we served. It was about building a community, offering opportunities, and inspiring change. Every dish, every interaction, every program we implemented was designed with a greater purpose in mind: to make a difference in people's lives." Pedro went on, sharing touching stories of individuals who had benefited from Latoil's training programs and community initiatives. He spoke about Maria, who had found a new career and purpose through the culinary program, and about Jean-Marc, whose life had been transformed by a simple act of kindness. Jean-Marc is living proof that a gesture of compassion can have unimaginable repercussions, Pedro said, his eyes shining as he remembered the renowned chef who was now his business partner. His transformation was not only personal but also professional. He brought a new perspective to Latoil, helping us elevate our culinary standards and expand our mission. At the end of his speech, Pedro received a standing ovation. Business leaders, entrepreneurs, and aspiring innovators approached him with questions and words of gratitude, all eager to apply the principles he had shared to their own ventures. Back at Latoil, Pedro and Jean-Marc gathered in their main kitchen, reflecting on the impact of their mission. "Can you believe how far we've come, Jean-Marc?" Pedro asked, as he watched the synchronized movement of the team preparing dinner. "It's incredible, Pedro. And to think it all started with a simple plate of food offered to a stranger," Jean-Marc replied, smiling. "It reminds me that our true wealth is in the lives we touch." Pedro nodded in deep agreement. "The legacy of Latoil is not in the profits we generate, but in the impact we have on the community," he said with conviction. "Every restaurant, every project, every dish served is an opportunity to teach, inspire, and transform." As the sun set and the restaurant lights came on, the Latoil team prepared for another busy evening. Knowing they were doing more than just serving food, they were building a legacy of love, compassion, and innovation. The sound of laughter and lively conversations filled the air, a familiar melody that reminded Pedro and Jean-Marc why they had started this journey. As they looked to the future, they were certain that, regardless of the challenges they encountered, they would continue to make a difference, one plate at a time. As time passed, the impact of Latoil spread globally, gaining recognition not only for its exceptional cuisine but also for being a bastion of social change and sustainability. Pedro's journey, filled with overcome challenges and acts of compassion, became an inspiring legend in the culinary industry. On a special gala night held in Paris, Latoil was about to receive one of the most prestigious awards in the culinary world, the Innovation and Social Impact in Gastronomy Award. Pedro and Jean-Marc, accompanied by their dedicated team, were present at the event, feeling a mix of nervousness and pride. The event hall, filled with sparkling chandeliers and elegantly decorated tables, was packed with the most influential figures in the gastronomic sector. Renowned chefs, food critics, and journalists from around the world had gathered to celebrate the notable achievements of the year. The evening's host, a famous personality in the culinary world, took the stage with a warm smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to present this year's Innovation and Social Impact in Gastronomy Award to a restaurant that has redefined what it means to serve the community." Latoil, led by Pedro and Jean-Marc, not only serves exceptional dishes but also nourishes the soul of their community. They have proven that true excellence goes beyond culinary technique. It's about the heart and compassion with which you serve. The room erupted in applause, and Pedro, visibly moved, stood up to accept the award. Jean-Marc accompanied him, both wearing smiles that reflected years of hard work and dedication. Thank you all," Pedro began, holding the microphone firmly as he looked at the audience. "Receiving this award is an indescribable honor, not just for me and Jean-Marc, but for the entire Latoil team and the community that has supported us from the beginning." Jean-Marc, his voice steady and full of gratitude, added, "Our journey began with a simple act of kindness, and seeing where we are today is truly inspiring. This award is a testament to the power of compassion and innovation. We hope our story inspires others to see beyond profit and invest in their communities." After the ceremony, the room was filled with lively conversations, with many people approaching Pedro and Jean-Marc to congratulate them and learn more about their vision. Among them was Chloe Durant, the blogger whose initial exposure had sparked the transformation of Latoil. "Pedro, Jean-Marc, I can't express how proud I am of you and what Latoil has become," said Chloe, hugging them both. "You've truly changed the game." Chloe, Your support from the start was crucial in getting us here." "We are eternally grateful," Pedro replied, holding her hand sincerely. As the night went on, the Latoil team celebrated their victory, remembering every step that had brought them to this point. Every challenge, every triumph, every dish served with love and dedication. The atmosphere was charged with emotions, not just of success but of a profound sense of purpose. Pedro, reflecting on the journey, realized that the true recognition was not just in the awards or the fame, but in the lives they had touched, the changes they had inspired, and the legacy they were building. "Jean-Marc, we're just getting started. There's so much more we can do," Pedro said, his gaze fixed on a horizon full of possibilities. "Absolutely, Pedro. The heart of Latoil will continue to beat strongly, inspiring and nourishing many more," Jean-Marc agreed, with a sparkle in his eyes that reflected the flame of passion that would never fade. As the night drew to a close, the future of Latoil shone brighter than ever, promising to continue on a path of compassion, innovation, and excellence. And so, Pedro, Jean-Marc, and the entire team prepared to face new challenges and opportunities, knowing that the true value of a chef is not just in culinary skills, but in the heart with which they serve the world.
So, if you're not subscribed yet, click on the subscribe button below and join our community. Thank you for your support and see you in the next videos.